Dr. Sophia Ellis, a historian specializing in early 20th century American family structures, had attended dozens of estate auctions throughout New England. But something about the Hawthorne collection felt different. The auctioneer explained that the items had been discovered in a sealed storage room of a Victorian mansion in Concord, New Hampshire, untouched for over a century. Lot 47, the auctioneer announced, holding up a large ornately framed family portrait. Formal family photograph, circa 1905. Professional studio quality, starting bid $50. Sophia raised her paddle immediately, drawn by the photograph's exceptional clarity and composition. The image showed a well-dressed family of 7 arranged in the traditional formal pose of the era, parents seated in the center with 5 children of varying ages positioned around them. The father appeared distinguished in his dark suit, while the mother wore an elaborate dress with intricate beadwork typical of the period's formal wear. As the bidding continued, Sophia studied the family's faces through her small magnifying glass. 4 of the children displayed the serious, composed expressions typical of formal portraits from 1905. Standing rigidly with hands folded, eyes fixed solemnly on the camera, the parents maintained the dignified bearing expected of prosperous Americans of their era. But something about the youngest child caught her attention and wouldn't let go. While the rest of the family maintained perfect formal composure, the little boy, perhaps 4 or 5 years old, displayed a wide, delighted grin that seemed utterly out of place in the solemn family portrait. His expression was so incongruous with the formal setting that it created an almost unsettling contrast with his family members' serious demeanor. Sophia won the bidding at $180, considerably more than she had intended to spend, but her instincts told her this photograph contained a story worth investigating. As she carefully wrapped the portrait for transport, she noticed a small brass nameplate at the bottom of the frame. The Hawthorne family, Concord, New Hampshire, October 1905. Back in her office at Dartmouth College, Sophia would discover that the little boy's inappropriate grin was just the beginning of one of the most disturbing family mysteries in New England's history. Under the bright lights of her research laboratory, Dr. Ellis carefully examined every detail of the Hawthorne family portrait. Using high-resolution digital scanning, she created detailed images that revealed aspects invisible to casual observation. What she discovered made the little boy's grin even more disturbing, especially as the scanner's light seemed to flicker momentarily, casting an odd, fleeting shadow across the boy's face that made her pause and glance over her shoulder, feeling inexplicably watched in the otherwise empty room. The formal studio setting appeared completely typical for 1905. An ornate Victorian chair, heavy drapery, and careful lighting that spoke of considerable expense. The photographer had clearly been skilled and professional, suggesting this was an important family document rather than a casual snapshot. The family members were arranged in classic hierarchical order. Edward Hawthorne, the patriarch, appeared to be in his mid-40s with the stern bearing of a successful businessman. His wife, Isabella, displayed the refined elegance expected of a prosperous merchant family's matriarch. Their 4 older children, 3 daughters and a son, ranged in age from approximately 8 to 16, all maintaining the composed expressions appropriate for formal photography. But as Sophia magnified the image of the youngest child, details emerged that made her increasingly uncomfortable. The boy's grin wasn't just inappropriately cheerful, it was knowing, almost cunning. His eyes held an intelligence that seemed far beyond his apparent age. And there was something about his expression that suggested he was aware of something the photographer and viewers weren't supposed to see. More disturbing was what Sophia noticed about the family's positioning. While the formal arrangement appeared conventional, closer examination revealed subtle tensions. The older children's eyes showed traces of what looked like fear or anxiety, carefully controlled but visible under magnification. Isabella Hawthorne's hands were clasped so tightly that her knuckles showed white through her gloves, and Edward Hawthorne's jaw appeared clenched despite his formally neutral expression. Only the youngest child seemed completely relaxed and genuinely happy, a stark contrast that suggested he either didn't understand whatever was making the rest of his family uncomfortable, or he understood it all too well and found it amusing. Sophia began researching the Hawthorne family's history, hoping to understand what circumstances might explain the strange dynamics captured in this seemingly normal family portrait. The Concord Historical Society's archives contained extensive records of the Hawthorne family, who had been prominent in New Hampshire's textile and shipping industries throughout the late 1800s. Edward Hawthorne had built a substantial fortune through strategic investments in both manufacturing and import businesses, establishing his family as one of Concord's most respected merchant dynasties. But as Sophia delved deeper into the family's documentation, she began to find gaps and inconsistencies that suggested their public image might not have reflected their private reality. Birth records for the children showed normal progression for 4 of the 5, but the youngest child's documentation was peculiar. Little Oliver Hawthorne's birth certificate listed his birth date as March 15, 1900, which would make him 5 years old in the 1905 photograph. However, Sophia found earlier family documents that referenced a different Oliver Hawthorne, described as the family's ward rather than biological son, with references to his unusual circumstances and need for special care and attention. More puzzling were references in Edward Hawthorne's business correspondence to the boy's special requirements and payments made to what appeared to be medical specialists and private tutors. The amounts were substantial, suggesting that Oliver's care involved considerable expense and specialized attention. Sophia discovered a particularly intriguing letter from Isabella Hawthorne to her sister, dated August 1905, just 2 months before the family portrait was taken. Oliver continues to present challenges that require constant vigilance. Edward insists we maintain normal family appearances, but the boy's nature makes this increasingly difficult. We have arranged for the family portrait as he requested, though I fear what people might notice if they look too carefully. The letter's tone suggested that Oliver's presence in the family involved some kind of ongoing difficulty or concern that the parents were working to conceal from public view. But what kind of nature would require such careful management? And why would Edward Hawthorne insist on including the boy in a formal family portrait if he posed such challenges? Sophia realized she needed to research not just the family's public records, but also medical and legal documents that might explain Oliver's unusual status and the family's apparent anxiety about his behavior. As she pored over these old papers late into the evening, a faint whisper of wind through the archive's vents made her skin prickle, as if the words on the page were echoing softly in the quiet room. Sophia's search through medical archives and hospital records revealed a pattern of consultations that painted a troubling picture of Oliver Hawthorne's early years. Beginning in 1901, when he would have been about 1 year old, the family had sought medical advice from specialists in Portland, Boston, and even as far away as Baltimore. The medical records, while discreetly worded due to the era's privacy customs, described a child who displayed developmental anomalies of behavioral and intellectual nature that puzzled the physicians who examined him. Dr. Elias Thornton of Portland Children's Hospital had written in 1903, the child presents normal physical development but displays cognitive and emotional characteristics that appear inconsistent with typical childhood development patterns. His intellectual capacity appears advanced beyond his chronological age, while his emotional responses to social situations are concerning. More specific details emerged from Dr. Lydia Beaumont's notes from Boston Presbyterian Hospital in 1904. Young Oliver demonstrates remarkable intellectual precocity, capable of complex reasoning and observation that would be exceptional in a child twice his age. However, his empathetic responses appear significantly underdeveloped. He shows no distress when witnessing others' pain and appears to find others' discomfort amusing rather than concerning. The medical consultations had apparently focused on what modern psychology would recognize as signs of antisocial personality development. But the primitive understanding of child psychology in 1905 had left the physicians unable to provide clear guidance to the family. Sophia found correspondence between Edward Hawthorne and Dr. Thornton discussing management strategies for Oliver's behavior. The doctor had recommended careful supervision to prevent the child from engaging in activities that might harm others and suggested that normal family interaction should be maintained to encourage appropriate social development. Though vigilance is essential, the family portrait began to take on new significance. As Sophia understood, it had been taken during a period when the Hawthornes were struggling to manage a child whose psychological development was causing serious concern. Oliver's inappropriate grin now seemed less like childish exuberance and more like the expression of someone who understood far more about the family's tensions than a normal 5-year-old should. But Sophia's most disturbing discovery was yet to come, hidden in legal documents that revealed what had ultimately happened to young Oliver Hawthorne. At the New Hampshire State Archives, Sophia requested access to legal documents related to the Hawthorne family estate. What she discovered there made Oliver's unsettling grin in the family portrait even more chilling. In January 1906, just 3 months after the family portrait was taken, Edward Hawthorne had filed a petition with the Concord family court requesting that Oliver be declared a ward of the state due to dangerous behavioral tendencies that pose a risk to family safety. The petition included detailed documentation of incidents that had occurred throughout 1905. The court records, sealed for decades due to the sensitive nature involving a minor, described a pattern of behavior that would have been deeply troubling to any family. Oliver had apparently been involved in a series of incidents involving the family's pets, servants, and even his siblings that demonstrated what the court documents described as a concerning lack of normal emotional response and apparent enjoyment of others' distress. Isabella Hawthorne's testimony, given in a closed court session, described finding Oliver smiling with obvious pleasure while deliberately causing pain to the family cat, and noted several occasions when servants had reported the boy attempting to harm them through deliberate mischief that could have caused serious injury. Most disturbing were the references to incidents involving Oliver's siblings. The court records indicated that the older children had been increasingly reluctant to be alone with Oliver, and that several had reported to their parents that the boy enjoys frightening them and has threatened to hurt them while smiling. Dr. Thornton had provided expert testimony supporting the family's petition, stating that the child displays characteristics consistent with what alienists term moral insanity, an inability to experience normal emotional connections with others combined with apparent satisfaction in causing distress. Without intensive institutional intervention, such children often develop into adults who pose serious threats to society. The court had granted the Hawthorne family's petition, and Oliver had been committed to the New Hampshire State Hospital for nervous and mental disorders in February 1906. The commitment papers indicated he was to remain there until such time as medical authorities determined he no longer poses a danger to himself or others. Sophia realized that the family portrait from October 1905 had been taken during the final months of Oliver's time with the Hawthorne family, when they were already planning to have him institutionalized. His knowing grin suddenly seemed like the expression of a child who was aware of the chaos and fear he was creating in his family, and who found it deeply amusing. As she read through the commitment documents, a shadow from the archive's overhead lamp shifted unexpectedly, not matching the steady light source, sending a subtle chill down her spine that she attributed to the room's drafty air. Sophia's research into the New Hampshire State Hospital's historical records required special permissions due to the sensitive nature of mental health documentation. But her academic credentials and research purpose eventually gained her access to Oliver Hawthorne's institutional file. What she discovered there was a detailed chronicle of a child whose behavioral problems had continued and intensified after his commitment. The hospital's medical staff, led by Dr. Victor Hale, had documented Oliver's progress through regular evaluations and incident reports that painted a picture of a profoundly disturbed child who seemed unable to develop normal emotional connections with others. Patient continues to display remarkable intellectual capacity while demonstrating complete absence of empathetic response, Dr. Hale had written in March 1906. Oliver shows no distress at being separated from his family and appears to view his circumstances as an interesting experiment rather than a punishment or treatment. The hospital staff had noted Oliver's unusual ability to manipulate both other patients and staff members through what they described as superficial charm and apparent cooperation that masked his true intentions. Several incident reports described Oliver deliberately provoking other patients to violence while maintaining his own appearance of innocence. But the most chilling aspect of Oliver's institutional records was the staff's growing recognition that traditional treatment methods were having no effect on his condition. The child appears incapable of genuine remorse or emotional learning, one evaluation noted. He can mimic appropriate responses when it serves his purposes, but shows no evidence of actual psychological development or improvement. Sophia found correspondence between Dr. Hale and Edward Hawthorne discussing the family's continued financial responsibility for Oliver's care. The letters revealed that while the Hawthorne family was meeting their financial obligations, they had requested that all communication about Oliver's condition be conducted through their attorney rather than directly with family members. Mr. Hawthorne, has indicated that for the emotional well-being of his wife and remaining children, the family wishes to minimize direct contact with information about Oliver's institutional progress. Dr. Hale had written to the family's lawyer in 1907. While this is understandable given the traumatic circumstances of his commitment, it does suggest that Oliver's reintegration with his biological family is increasingly unlikely. The institutional records continued through Oliver's adolescence, documenting a pattern of manipulative behavior, lack of genuine emotional development, and what modern psychology would recognize as classic psychopathic personality traits. Sophia realized she was reading the documentation of one of the earliest cases of childhood psychopathy to be systematically recorded by American medical institutions. As she turned the pages, a faint, unexplained rustle from the corner of the reading room made her heart skip a beat, though she dismissed it as settling papers in the quiet solitude. Sophia's investigation into the Hawthorne family's life after Oliver's institutionalization revealed the profound impact his presence had on the entire family structure. Through newspaper archives, social registers, and personal correspondence, she traced how the family had rebuilt their lives following the traumatic events of 1905-1906. The 4 older Hawthorne children had all left Concord within a few years of Oliver's commitment. Despite the family's substantial local business interests, Eliza, the eldest daughter, had married and moved to Portland in 1908. The 2 middle daughters had been sent to finishing schools in Boston and had remained on the East Coast after graduation. Even William, the oldest son who would have been expected to inherit the family business, had relocated to Oregon in 1910. Isabella Hawthorne's health had apparently suffered significantly following Oliver's institutionalization. Sophia found references in local society pages to Isabella's extended rest for her health and later mentions of her living as a semi-invalid who rarely appeared at social functions after 1907. Edward Hawthorne had gradually liquidated his business interests in Concord, eventually relocating the family to a smaller estate in rural Vermont, where they could live more privately. The move appeared to have been motivated by a desire to escape the social scrutiny and whispered rumors that had followed the family after Oliver's dramatic removal from their household. But Sophia's most significant discovery was a cache of letters between Isabella Hawthorne and her sister that had been preserved in a private family collection. These letters, written between 1906 and 1912, provided insight into the family's emotional recovery from their ordeal with Oliver. "We live now with the knowledge that evil can wear the face of innocence," Isabella had written in 1907. "I look back at that family portrait and see how blind we were to what Oliver truly was. His smile, which we took for childhood joy, was actually the expression of something dark and calculating that we failed to recognize until it was almost too late." Isabella's letters described her ongoing nightmares about Oliver and her fears that his influence might have somehow affected her other children. "I watch my remaining children constantly for signs of Oliver's nature, though Dr. Thornton assures me that such conditions are not contagious. Still, I cannot forget how he looked at his siblings, how he seemed to study their fears and find ways to exploit them." The correspondence revealed that the Hawthorne family had lived in a state of constant anxiety during Oliver's final years in their household, never knowing what disturbing behavior they might discover next. While reading these intimate letters, Sophia felt a subtle unease, as if a whisper caught on the edge of silence lingered just beyond her hearing, heightening the emotional weight of the words. Sophia consulted with Dr. Julian Moreau, a modern child psychologist at Dartmouth College, to better understand Oliver Hawthorne's case from a contemporary clinical perspective. Dr. Moreau's analysis of the historical medical records provided insight into what the 1905-era physicians had been observing but lacked the theoretical framework to properly understand. "What you're describing sounds like a textbook case of childhood-onset conduct disorder with psychopathic trait," Dr. Moreau explained. "The combination of intellectual precocity, absence of empathy, manipulation of others, and apparent enjoyment of causing distress are classic indicators of what we now recognize as antisocial personality disorder developing in early childhood." Dr. Moreau noted that Oliver's case was particularly striking because of how well documented it was during an era when child psychology was still in its infancy. The physicians treating Oliver were remarkably observant, even though they lacked the diagnostic categories we use today. Their descriptions of his behavior are consistent with modern understanding of childhood psychopathy. The historical medical records had documented something that modern research had confirmed. Children who display these traits at such a young age rarely respond to treatment and typically develop into adults who pose serious risks to society. The Hawthorne family's decision to institutionalize Oliver was probably the best choice available to them given the limited understanding and treatment options of their era, Dr. Moreau observed. But Dr. Moreau also pointed out something that made Oliver's case even more unusual: the family's recognition of the severity of his condition. Many families in that era, and even today, struggle to accept that a young child could display such disturbing traits. The Hawthornes' willingness to take dramatic action suggests they had observed behavior that genuinely frightened them. Sophia realized that the family portrait had captured a moment when the Hawthornes were still trying to maintain the appearance of normal family life while dealing with a child whose psychological development was fundamentally different from typical human emotional patterns. Oliver's grin represented not childhood innocence, but the expression of someone who understood he was causing fear and distress in his family, and found it entertaining. That smile, Dr. Moreau concluded after studying the magnified image, is probably the most authentic expression in the entire photograph. While his family members are struggling to maintain composed appearances, Oliver is genuinely enjoying himself because he knows something they're trying to hide from the photographer and the world. Sophia's research into Oliver Hawthorne's later life required extensive investigation through institutional archives, court records, and medical documentation. What she discovered revealed the long-term outcome of one of New England's earliest documented cases of childhood psychopathy. Oliver had remained at the New Hampshire State Hospital until 1916, when he turned 16. The institutional records from his teenage years showed continued behavioral problems, but also documented his growing sophistication at manipulating both staff and other patients. Patient has developed considerable skill at presenting himself as reformed and cooperative, one evaluation noted. However, staff members report that his apparent progress is superficial and that incidents involving other patients continue when Oliver believes he is unobserved. At 16, Oliver had been transferred to a specialized facility for young adults in Vermont, where he spent another 4 years under institutional care. But Sophia discovered that in 1920, as America focused its attention and resources on the aftermath of World War I and emerging global tensions, many state institutions had been forced to release patients who were deemed manageable due to funding constraints and staff shortages. Oliver Hawthorne had been among those released despite medical recommendations that he continue to receive institutional supervision. The discharge papers noted that while patient continues to display antisocial tendencies, he has demonstrated ability to function in society without direct supervision, and current institutional resources must be prioritized for more acute cases. Sophia found scattered records suggesting that Oliver had spent his early adult years moving between different cities throughout New England, never staying in one place long enough to establish permanent ties. Police records from various municipalities contained reports of incidents involving an Oliver Hawthorne or individuals matching his description, but nothing that had led to serious criminal charges. The trail went cold in the late 1920s, around the time Oliver would have been in his late 20s. Sophia could find no death certificate, marriage record, or other official documentation that definitively tracked his later life. But her most disturbing discovery was a series of unsolved cases from the 1920s and 1930s involving missing children and unexplained deaths in communities where Oliver had been documented as living temporarily. While no direct evidence connected him to these incidents, the pattern suggested that his release from institutional care might have had tragic consequences for others. Sophia realized she was documenting not just a family tragedy, but a case study in how society's limited understanding of dangerous psychological conditions had potentially allowed a predator to operate freely for decades. As she compiled these final pieces, a lantern-like glow from her desk lamp dimmed inexplicably for a moment, creating elongated shadows that danced across the walls, amplifying the sense of lingering unease in her findings. Sophia's final research phase involved assembling all the documentation she had gathered to understand the complete story behind the Hawthorne family portrait. As she laid out the chronological evidence, the medical consultations, family correspondence, court records, and institutional documentation, the true significance of Oliver's disturbing grin became clear. The photograph had been taken in October 1905, At a moment when the Hawthorne family was desperately trying to maintain the appearance of normalcy while secretly planning to have their youngest child institutionalized. Edward Hawthorne had insisted on the family portrait as part of his efforts to preserve their social standing and create a visual record of their family before Oliver's removal would make such images impossible. But Oliver himself seemed to understand exactly what was happening. His inappropriate grin wasn't the expression of an innocent child unaware of his family's distress. It was the knowing smile of someone who realized he had created chaos and fear in his household and found the situation amusing rather than troubling. The portrait captures a moment of profound family trauma disguised as conventional documentation, Sophia wrote in her research conclusions. While 6 family members struggled to maintain composed appearances for posterity, Oliver displays genuine pleasure because he understands he is the source of their carefully hidden distress. Sophia arranged to present her findings to the American Historical Association's annual conference, where her research was recognized as a significant contribution to understanding how families dealt with severe psychological disorders before modern diagnostic and treatment methods were available. But she also worked with the Concord Historical Society to ensure that Oliver Hawthorne's story would serve as an educational case study for understanding childhood psychopathy and its impact on family structures. The family portrait, now properly contextualized, became part of an exhibit examining how photographic evidence can reveal hidden social realities when viewed with historical perspective and systematic research. Isabella Hawthorne's final letter to her sister, written in 1912, provided the most poignant summary of their family's ordeal. We learned that evil can indeed wear the face of childhood innocence, and that sometimes the most disturbing truth is hidden behind the most innocent smile. Oliver taught us that not all children are born with the capacity for love and empathy, and that recognizing this reality, no matter how painful, is sometimes necessary to protect others from harm. Sophia's research had revealed that the Hawthorne family portrait of 1905 documented not just a formal family gathering, but a moment when parents had been forced to confront the reality that one of their children posed a genuine threat to their family's safety and society's well-being. Oliver's unsettling grin had indeed hidden the truth, not the innocent joy of childhood, but the calculating pleasure of someone who understood exactly how much fear and pain he was capable of causing, and who found that knowledge deeply satisfying. In capturing that image, the Hawthornes had unknowingly created a historical document that preserved one of the most disturbing family secrets in New England's history. The smile of a child who had been born without the capacity for human empathy, and who had learned to use that absence as a weapon against those who should have been able to love and trust him.